Hey guys, welcome back to another video about the current situation with the M1 Pros, M1 Maxes and the M1 lineup. And essentially, I've been talking about a lot of reasons why you shouldn't buy the new computers, and this video is another one of them, because basically what I'm saying to you all is that these computers are super priced for good reason. I'm not harping on the reasons why they are super costly, but you have to consider a few things that Apple has done that you may need to question before you do your next purchase. Now, these videos that I make, I write down some general notes on a piece of paper and then I go for it. So when I say something, I'm genuinely meaning what I'm saying, and it's coming from my perspective, which is a filmmaker and someone who uses high-end video codecs and workflows to produce professional work. So straight off, these new computers, these M1 Pros and M1 Maxes, are for obviously a few percent of the population that are going to purchase a laptop for their work. I do acknowledge that I have an M1, and people might think, well, you've got an M1, so that's why you're not getting the M1 Pro and Max and things like that. I was actually super excited for these new computers, and when I saw and heard the Apple presentation, I was a little bit let down, well, quite a bit let down, because I thought that these computers would be prettier, first and foremost, and that they would focus more on the processor and the GPU, which they actually did. The GPU is quite a phenomenal leap of performance, and also having the expansion of the RAM, being able to move up to 64 gigabytes is definitely amazing. So don't get me wrong there. Where I was let down is in the design, and also how Apple just portrayed these computers as the Pro models. I think that they needed to just expand upon what they had already done with the M1. Just pretty much say this is the M1 version to, M2 or M1X. But aside from the naming convention, the reason why I'm talking about it is because it's called the M1 Pro. I feel that Apple are marketing geniuses, and they have used this M1 Pro model to distinguish between the M1, which is just the M1 MacBook now, M1 MacBook Pro. It doesn't really make much sense to call it that, but it's essentially now the M1 Pro and M1 Max. So it's this kind of thing where you go into the store and you go, I want a professional computer, and they'll just recommend you the M1 Pro. And in most cases, I feel you would only need the M1 Air or M1 MacBook Pro, because number one, you save a lot of money, and number two, for a laptop, they do anything and everything. Comparing to my PC, the M1 base model MacBook Pro keeps up to my PC's performance for the majority of the time. If I'm editing 1080p files, some 4K, some basic effects, doing some Lightroom editing, Photoshop, it keeps up for the most part. It's only when I change over to RAW codecs or working with 6K, 4K files, and a lot of them, that the PC kicks in. The obviously the dedicated GPU, the heat sinks and all the components like the RAM, the liquid cooling, they all kick in, right? And that's the distinguishing properties of the difference between a PC and a laptop notebook. They're the space in which all the components can work together, in terms of cooling and thermal throttling. It's also just the ability for the components to be dedicated to their specific areas. Yes, the M1 is integrated and it's amazing. However, there's still a limit on the M1 machines. On the M1 machines, there's this wall that you hit, and it's like, no matter how amazing the specs are, no matter if the M1 Pro has 8 performance chips versus the 4 in the M1, it just feels like that they're not going to really they're going to pass the wall slightly, but it's still quite low compared to where the PC sort of threshold gets to, where it sort of maxes out. It's just a totally different ball game. And I understand in the comments people have said you're comparing a PC to a laptop, and I am. I'm just really trying to provide the most value for those who are thinking about purchasing new computers and technology in general. I mean, I'm a filmmaker and photographer, so we use what we can. You don't always have the best camera, but you can sometimes produce better results with a $300 to $400 setup, and you have your $5,000 camera, but you don't know how to use a certain function on it. It just renders it redundant, and your smaller budget camera does a better job because you know it inside and out. I feel the same way with the M1 MacBook Pros and Airs. If you know your workflow and you know how to manage your files and really push your machine to where it needs to go, that machine itself for 1,500 Australian dollars, approximately for the Air and the Pro, give or take $300, is such a better investment than going out and spending $3,000 on a machine that doesn't even look that good. So moving on to the design of the M1 Pro, I understand that the notch makes sense, but it just doesn't look right. And I feel that the aesthetic of a laptop is very important. When you're framing things up, it just needs that continuity. Yes, there's going to be the toolbar and it's going to work with the toolbar. I just don't want to see technology within the frame. How do I word this? I don't want to see technology, like physical technology, when I'm on a computer. I want to see the screen. I want to see what I'm working on and not really think about that there's a camera there and everything. So just on a small note, I think the notch was a design failure. I would have been happy with a 14-inch screen, not a 14.2-inch screen. I don't think we need that extra real estate. We already have, a little bit more extra than the 13, and the 13 is usable. It's definitely usable for professional applications. You also have the 16-inch model available. A 16-inch model with a notch, it just doesn't feel like it should be there. Also, the design, it looks boaty. It doesn't look sleek. It feels like they've gone back to the old 2010 design, which was okay, but not for 2021, 2022 going forward. They should have, the size, I think that's okay to have a thicker notebook, but just the design of it all, from what I've seen, it just doesn't look right. So the design, I believe, was a failure on Apple's part. I do obviously welcome back the I/O ports. I think they just did that to appease the professionals, because otherwise professionals would just complain again and probably end up moving to a PC-based system where functionality is just so much easier. Because Windows 10 is actually quite a good operating system. I've been using Windows 10 for a few years now, and it's reasonably good. Before Windows 7 and 8, it was just terrible. I didn't want to partake in any Windows computers, but now Windows 10 is actually usable. I still do prefer OS X. It is such a better system. It's just smoother. You have your integrations with your iPhone and iPad and iOS devices. It's just much more of a friendlier ecosystem and a productive ecosystem and work flow for myself. So to wrap it up, I'm really happy about the M1 Pro and M1 Max's ability to scale up to 16, 32, 64 gigabytes of RAM. I think that the new CPU will have some performance gains. I'm happy about the I/O ports. What I'm not happy about is the price, the design, the notch, the shape of the system, even the keyboard. I think that you need to change you have to have a contrast in between the keys and the keywell. And all in all, I don't think you're going to be having the biggest gains compared to the M1 for the price. For those out there that just get the latest machine, I know you're going to go and buy it, and that's fine. And it's obviously an amazing supercomputer, portable supercomputer, but so is the M1. So is the M1 Air and M1 MacBook Pro. And I believe I'm keeping my M1 MacBook Pro, even though it has the touch bar. I hate it. That's the only thing that is something that I would consider changing for, and that's not a big enough reason to upgrade a computer. I don't need the performance gains. I have the base model, the 8GB 256. I work with it. I have my PC. And if I was to go out and purchase a new system, like many of you watching these videos are, I would buy either an Air or a MacBook Pro base model, buy yourself an SSD, a 1TB SSD, have that as a portable solution, and go and spend the extra $1,500 on a PC box. So a PC based system, if you're doing big renders, if you're doing large complex tasks, I feel that that would be a wiser investment than these new computers, or even wait for them to come out secondhand and purchase one there. I predict that people will purchase these machines and in a few months not even use them to their full extent. They're going to be so powerful, yet they also hit that wall we were talking about, that wall where it doesn't matter how powerful your laptop is, it's still a laptop GPU, it's still a laptop CPU. It's an M1 integrated system, sure, but it's just this wall that a PC can reach that other computers cannot. So I hope this video is helpful to you when you're considering ordering the new MacBook, and to not feel like you're missing out if you do order the previous generation M1 systems. I vouch by them. I believe that if you purchase one, you won't be upset with your purchase, and also Apple allows you to return products within 2 weeks. Just check with Apple in your country, but that's a really good system. I did that with the Air. I purchased the Air and then I returned it and bought the M1 MacBook Pro, and it turned out really good. Thanks for checking in, subscribing, commenting, and just being part of the general conversation. I don't want to go too far into all these computers, but I just want to make sure that you guys are, have some information on the other side, that you're able to take different pieces of opinion and information and formulate your own for what you need the computers to do. The technology needs to serve us. We don't need to serve the technology. We don't need to feel like we need to be buying the professional computers to be professionals. If you are someone who uses computers for your work, the M1 or the M1 Pros will just be an amazing computer to buy. If you're someone who's getting into creative photography, video production, coding, all these things, the M1 Air is a perfect computer to start your creative adventures. Thanks for checking in. I hope you're doing well. In Melbourne, we just got our lockdown, so there's a little bit more social life happening, but I'll be sure to check in with you guys soon. Thanks for hanging out. Take care, and I'll see you around.